So Ginny, we've been observing in your classroom for a couple of days now, and just so excited by the student learning and thinking with regard to their reading that I'm seeing. And just I want to list off some of the things specifically that I've noticed that I think, been really impressive with regard to your work with the students. We've seen students using the Foundations and Frameworks process questions and the visual tools to identify and organize key ideas from the text, and then even refining those somewhat in your small groups. Students using the vocabulary in their writing and their speaking about the book that they're reading, even with words that aren't from the text that they're reading, words that were selected from other texts, which is really, really interesting and fun to see. Students considering additional ideas, which is actually one of my favorite things that we'll talk about in a moment. But I've seen them predicting what may happen next. I've seen them identifying, only the 2 or 3 most important events in a text, interpreting figurative language to deepen their understanding of sections of text. Wonderful. One of my favorite things in your small groups is the elaborative discussion. Often that's sparked by questions you've asked or actions that you've engaged them in. And all of that just results in a deeper understanding of the text, and that it's interesting to watch and observe that because you actually can see insight on the students' faces, which is great fun to see. Students engaged in meaningful oral reading skills or in meaningful oral reading to practice fluency skills, to revisit key sections of the text. Students also applying, and I know we haven't necessarily caught this on camera, but students also applying all of these skills to independent reading projects. Mm-hmm. And then I think what most just really impresses me is the atmosphere in which all of this happens. It's relaxed, and yet students take the work you've asked them to do in preparation for the small groups very seriously. It's really an ideal environment for the kind of thinking and interaction that you want to have happen in Foundations and Frameworks. So what I'd like to do is, as much as we can, pull back the curtain a little bit and talk about how you've made this happen. Because there are so many strategies and things that you use that I think would be beneficial for others to hear about. The other thing I have to keep reminding myself of is I'm seeing all of this, and these particular students have really only been in Foundations and Frameworks for 2 years. This is really only their second year in the program. And yet the quality of the thinking and interaction we're seeing, I think that I could show other people video from some of your small groups and say, and if they couldn't see it, they only heard the audio, I'd say, what grade do you think those students were in? I don't think that they would guess 5th grade necessarily, because your students are, like I said before, taking it so seriously. So let's see if we can pull back the curtain a little bit. Even before you begin meeting with small groups, your classes have that wonderful, relaxed, calm atmosphere. And that just allows your students to work diligently, whether they're in the small group or not in the small group. What do you do at the beginning of the school year to establish that tone, especially during small group meetings?
The first couple of weeks of school, we really work to establish routine and procedures. The students know what my expectations are from the beginning. And we work through those expectations during the entire first unit, just so they can kind of see how they work. I explain everything, but it's easier once they see it.
Right.
And they realize that, I mean what I say.
Yeah.
We still have that relaxed atmosphere, and I have a good relationship with them. But they know that I'm going to hold them accountable for their work, and we just work really hard at the beginning of the year to establish those routines.
Okay, great. So in that first unit, it's almost, in addition to the reading that's taking place, you're kind of training them for this is how you work during small group time, whether you're in the small group or not.
Right.
Yeah.
In the first unit, we're at small group, and it's more me having to pull things out of them. Mm-hmm. And as we progress through the year, they get used to the routine, and I have to do less work and can sit back and watch them because they learn how things run. And the students at their desks know that anything they do at their desk, I am going to hold them accountable for. When they come to small group, I'm going to check it, and I'm going to write comments in their specs log to help them improve their work the next time. Mm-hmm. So they know that anything they do will be looked at by me. So
Great. your small groups, they just run so smoothly. So let's talk a little bit about your planning process. If you were, if you could, summarize how you go about planning for a small group session, what are some of the key things that you think through?
I would say I probably plan pretty loosely for small groups, really. I have a few certain ideas, things that I know that I need to cover during that group period, whether it's focusing on vocabulary because I know we have the vocabulary quiz coming up, or focusing on the process questions and visual tool to be sure they understand everything well for the fresh text test, checking what they've done in their specs log. But even though I have those couple of points that I definitely want to get in, I still leave it open so that the small group takes us where it will.
Yeah, and we talked about that a little bit yesterday.
Just being able to kind of go with the flow because you never know from group to group where the discussion may lead.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, just observing the kids yesterday and one of the activities you engaged them in, the one kid replied with, I envision yellow clouds. Or, just there's so many interesting ways the discussion can go.
And I never want to shut that creativity down.
Right, because you can see their wheels turning and that adding to their comprehension of text. So if you had to quantify it, if you had to take a guess at, I would say this percentage is planned of my small group and this percentage is kind of what happens in the small group.
I would say maybe 60-40. Okay. 60 planned, 40 just where we go.
Yeah. And I know that varies from day to day,
It varies from day to day and from group to group.
Yeah. All right. Your students produce evidence of some excellent thinking in their specs logs. What and how have you communicated to them to get them to approach the pre-group reading and thinking so seriously? What is it that you've conveyed or continue to convey to them with regard? I know you talked about accountability.
Yes.
But even beyond that, it seems to me like they take their work and their specs logs quite personally.
I feel like as a teacher, one of the most important things is the relationship you develop with the children. And I feel like if from the beginning I can get to know each individual child and develop a good relationship with them where they feel comfortable with me, they don't want to disappoint me. So they work hard so that I'm not disappointed in their work.
Yeah, great.
That relationship makes a big difference.
Yeah, and like I said, it's just impressive to observe. We're focusing on the small group, and yet I'm trying to walk around behind the camera and catch what kids are doing in their specs logs because, like I said, it's the evidence they're showing of their thinking is so fantastic.
We give lots of examples, as well. I try to walk through each part of the specs log with them regularly so that they don't forget my expectations. If I just told them the first week of school and then never repeated it, it would go by the wayside. So at least once a week, we talk about each part of the specs log and what my expectations are there.
Excellent.
And that, in addition to the relationship, just really makes a big difference.
I love the way, too, you review the visual tool and the process questions at the beginning of your class period and before they start to work in the specs logs. And it's not, okay, let's recite the process questions. No, you draw the visual tool and you say, okay, very beginning of the visual tool, first thing we put in, what's the question associated with that?
Right.
Right now we're looking at plots, so it's what's the problem, and then pointing to the slope on the plot line. What is the question we ask here? And the way that you do that, I think, just helps the students understand the relationship between the process questions and the visual tool.
I don't want them to feel that it's memorization.
Right.
I don't want them to feel like I've got to memorize these process questions because they don't.
Yes.
If they understand the visual tool and what goes where, the process questions just come.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Another thing that I've noticed in your small groups is that at times you actually participate as if you're a group member. For example, one group you shared a My link, which was about being feverish as a child and having hallucinations, which related to what was happening with characters in the books. Do you participate in this way intentionally?
Probably when it started, it was not intentional, but I saw very quickly how it helped in so many ways. Number one, it gave them a good example of what I was looking for my link.
Yeah.
And number two, it made me more relatable to the students. they're again developing that relationship. I think if they feel comfortable sharing with me, I'm going to get so much more out of them at small group. And if I'm sharing in return, it just opens that up for so many things.
And I loved yesterday when that happened, one of the students said, "Were you scared?"
Mm-hmm.
Which I thought was such an interesting question,
Right.
because relating back to the book, and you even trying to explain, well, I wasn't really not there mentally, so no, I wasn't scared, but I'm sure my mother was.
Right.
And again, we may look at that and say, well, that's incidental, and yet it's not, because that you could see that child thinking about the characters then in the book. I mean, you could see again those wheels turning, and this is something I now understand better as a result of that. That was great. That was so great. One of my favorite strategies that you use to spark discussion is to have the students close their eyes and imagine what their senses would notice. It's not just what they see, but what they'd hear, what they'd smell. What kind of insights does this foster in the students?
I think that it just really helps them put themselves in the novel as one of the characters. As a reader, that's what I try to do. I love reading as an escape, and if I can actually jump into the novel, it just makes reading so much more fun. Mm-hmm. And at this age, making reading fun, in addition to learning those skills, is so important.
Yeah.
Because if it's not something they're interested in, they'll stop doing it, and we won't get them where they need to be.
Right.
So I think by encouraging them to jump into the book, see the book as if they were actually there, it just makes the reading that much more interesting, and they're able to get a lot more from it.
And I love the multisensory aspect of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yesterday they were discussing a book in which there's a yellow fever epidemic. But one of the kids said, and because a critical setting in the story is the coffee place, and I smell coffee, and just the blending of the unpleasantness and the pleasantness in terms of odor and what you would smell, and again observing that you just see, this is more than just imagining. In the early grades in Foundations and Frameworks, we teach referential representation, which is basically that idea, imagining. But you're doing so much more than see the movie in your head. Mm-hmm. It's, what do you see? What do you smell? Even what do you feel? And I just love the way that sparks not just discussion, but obviously insights in the students. What have you seen that convinces you that your students are growing in their comprehension and thinking abilities? I mean, I know what I've seen here, but you've been with them since the start of the school year. What have you seen that indicates to you growth in student reading and thinking?
Obviously, I've seen great progression in their specs log, from the beginning of the year to the point where we are now. A lot more detail in what they're seeing and what they're able to pull out of it. Mm-hmm. Deeper understanding, instead of just a basic, oh, she's sick. It's, a lot more.
Yeah.
A lot more depth to it. It's what she's sick with and the different things that are happening to her because of that. And they're seeing not only one person's perspective, but all of the characters' perspective. And the growth at small group, I wish you'd been here like the first week of school, to see, and then where they are now. The discussions have just really elevated since the beginning of the year. And the more that I can hear them talking about it, and the deeper their insight is, the better the comprehension.
Right. Yeah. Good. Thinking about small group interaction, someone who's starting brand new with Foundations and Frameworks, they want to have the kind of small groups we're observing in your classroom. What advice would you offer a new teacher to Foundations and Frameworks?
Have a plan.
Okay.
But expect to vary from that plan. Have a loose plan. I think sometimes if we overplan and try to keep those small groups too structured, or try to stop the creativity and pull them back to what we want them to focus on and be on, we lose a lot of that growth.
Yeah. In fact, that's one of the things I often have to tell teachers is one of the biggest mistakes you can make is over-planning your small group. Because you're going to be surprised at times. Right. you're going to want to follow those surprises at times, because a lot of times what the students bring up
it's amazing.
Is amazing. Yeah.
Stuff that I didn't think of, and I like to follow that. Of course, you have to have those certain concepts you're working on and focusing on in small group. That's the purpose of a small group.
Right.
But be ready for anything.
Yeah. Yeah, we want to touch the visual tool. We may want to talk about the site map and so forth, but there's a point where in the discussion, you really have to listen.
You have to listen.
So that you know what's worth following with regard to the students. But oftentimes there will be things worth following.
Absolutely.
Which is, I think, part of the fun of small group.
Right. I love
discovery.
Small groups.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else that you would like to share regarding foundations and frameworks? Anything related to your experience, your observations, anything at all?
When I first started Foundations and Frameworks, as a first-year teacher at UMS doing it, and coming into the program, I probably that first year felt a little overwhelmed because it's a lot.
Yeah.
I was learning as they were going through each unit, and I think the biggest challenge for me that first year was the accountability, being able to look at all of their work and for them to know I was reading every single word they wrote in that spec sock, especially with changing classes.
Yeah.
I've got this year 75 students, some years over 90, just depending on the year, and that's a lot of spec socks to go through.
Yes, it is.
But after, a few years, you just have to learn to manage your time. As long as you can manage your time well, it's fabulous.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you very much, and for welcoming us into your classroom.
Absolutely.
These
Thank
few
you
days.
for coming.
It's really been an honor to observe you in action.
Thank you.
It's just such a natural component of your classroom, and like I said before, the atmosphere which you've created in which all of this great work can happen is really notable, and something I would love to see in many, many classrooms. Thank you, and thank you for this time as well.
Absolutely.